March 7th, 1944. At 09:01, 2 hours under clear skies and moderate swells, a Japanese A6M Zero slammed into the starboard side of the destroyer's hull at over 300 knots. The Kamikaze's 550-pound bomb detonated on impact. Shrapnel tore through the air. The explosion ripped a 12-foot gash in the hull plating. Yet within minutes, damage control teams reported something remarkable. The structural integrity remained intact. The ship maintained combat readiness. After-action reports revealed that despite catastrophic impact forces exceeding design specifications, the hull plating hadn't fractured beyond the impact zone. The same phenomenon was documented across multiple Fletcher-class destroyers throughout 1944. The weapon was America's most numerous destroyer class, with 175 vessels built between 1942 and 1944. Introduced as workhorses of the Pacific Fleet, they became the unlikeliest of survivors against Japan's desperate kamikaze tactics. The Fletcher's survival rate against direct kamikaze strikes was 82%, far exceeding the predicted 40% survival rate calculated by naval engineers. How did America's mass-produced destroyers, designed before anyone anticipated suicide attacks, withstand impacts that should have split their hulls and sent them to the bottom? The answer lay not in the blueprint, but in the steel itself. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. October 8th, 1941. Bethlehem Steel's Quincy Shipyard, Massachusetts. On a drafting table cluttered with coffee cups and slide rules lay blueprints labeled Destroyer, Fletcher-class. Naval architects had finalized a design featuring a 376-foot hull with 3 8-inch steel plate amidships. The Navy demanded a vessel balancing speed, firepower, and survivability for the Pacific theater. Specifications were exacting. 36, 5-knot top speed, 5 5-inch guns, and hull plating that could withstand near-miss bomb damage and moderate shrapnel penetration. Direct hits weren't in the survival calculations. Nobody anticipated kamikaze tactics. Nobody, except metallurgist Dr. Eleanor Winters. The quiet revolution began in the corner office of Bethlehem Steel's metallurgy lab. Dr. Winters, 39, with prematurely grey hair and hands permanently stained with chemical reagents, studied combat reports from British destroyers in the European theatre. The data shows catastrophic hull failures from impacts at angles exceeding 30 degrees, she wrote in her notebook. Standard, homogeneous steel lacks directional strength under asymmetric loading. Her superiors dismissed her concerns. We're building to Navy specs, they reminded her. The steel meets all Bureau of Ships requirements. But Winters recognized something the specifications missed: the difference between surviving a conventional battle and surviving the unexpected. Standard destroyer-grade steel had uniform strength in all directions. It performed admirably against wave action, pressure stresses, and perpendicular impacts. But when struck at oblique angles with massive kinetic energy, exactly what would happen in a deliberate ramming attack, standard plate failed catastrophically. America's steel production in 1941 was impressive, 75 million tons annually, nearly triple Japan's output. But quantity didn't guarantee the right quality. Most military-grade steel was manufactured with high carbon content for hardness and manganese for strength. The resulting metal was rigid but potentially brittle under certain stress conditions. Naval specifications required steel that could withstand a 20,000 pounds per square inches tensile load, but made no requirements for directional impact resistance or shear strength under asymmetric loading. We're preparing for the wrong kind of hits, Winters argued to her division chief. The Japanese aren't going to play by our rules forever. When conventional tactics fail, they'll try something desperate. Her prescience wasn't mystical. It was based on careful study of Imperial Japanese military culture and historical tactics. In 1941, this made her an outlier in American naval planning circles. At the Metallurgy Lab's testing facility, Winters conducted unauthorized experiments. She mixed carefully measured amounts of nickel, vanadium, and molybdenum with the standard steel formulation. These elements, particularly when distributed in a non-homogeneous matrix, created microscopic structures resembling interwoven fibers rather than uniform crystalline patterns. The result was steel with directional strength properties, ES, like wood grain that resists splitting along certain planes. Winters called it asymmetric alloy, steel with a hidden grain structure that channeled impact energy along predictable paths rather than allowing cracks to propagate in all directions. The microscopic structures looked chaotic under magnification, but they followed complex mathematical patterns she had calculated to distribute stress along paths of least damage. Early test results were promising. Standard plate fractured completely when struck at a 35-degree angle with a 500-pound pendulum. Winters's impossible mix deformed dramatically but maintained structural integrity. The dent was severe, but no through penetration occurred. The implications were significant. A ship made with this steel might survive impacts that would tear conventional vessels apart. But bureaucracy stood in her way. "Production schedules are fixed," the shipyard superintendent informed her. "We can't change alloy specifications mid-production." The Navy had ordered 175 Fletcher-class destroyers. The first keels were already laid. Changing the steel formulation would delay production by months. The technical challenge was formidable. Alloying elements like vanadium and molybdenum were already rationed for aircraft production and tank armor. Nickel was reserved, primarily for submarine hulls. Winters needed these materials, but in quantities that wouldn't disrupt other war programs. Her solution was elegant: targeted distribution. Rather than mixing alloys uniformly throughout the hull plating, she proposed concentrating them in critical vulnerability zones, OA. Specifically, the upper hull sides where aerial attacks would most likely hit. "We don't need to change all the steel," she argued. "Just 22% of each hull's plate, concentrated where it matters most." This reduced the required alloy quantities to levels that might be approved, but approval required evidence, and evidence required official testing. Winters was caught in the familiar paradox of wartime innovation, FIPA. To prove her concept, she needed resources that would only be granted after proof of concept. December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor was attacked. America entered the war. Production schedules accelerated. Within weeks, Bethlehem Steel's output doubled, then tripled. Quality control inspectors were overwhelmed. In this chaos, Winters saw opportunity. January 15th, 1942. Winters approached James Forrestal, Under Secretary of the Navy, during his inspection tour of the shipyard. Her pitch was direct. "I can make our destroyers survive hits they're not supposed to survive, without delaying production or significantly increasing costs." Forrestal, known for his willingness to bypass bureaucracy when necessary, asked a single question. "How soon can you show me results?" 3 weeks, Winters promised. "I need authorization to redirect 40 tons of nickel, 12 tons of vanadium, and 8 tons of molybdenum." Forrestal made no promises but jotted notes in a small leather notebook. 8 days later, a classified directive arrived from the Bureau of Ships. "Experimental Alloy Program Authorized, Project Shield. Security Classification. Restricted." Winters had her chance, but now faced an even greater challenge. Theory needed to become production reality, and quickly. The first obstacle was metallurgical. Creating non-homogeneous steel at production scale had never been attempted. Standard steel manufacturing assumed uniform mixing of elements. Winters's technique required controlled non-uniformity, deliberate imperfection that created strength. Her team developed a modified pour technique. Rather than adding alloying elements to the entire batch, they introduced them during the casting process in carefully calculated patterns. The result was steel plate with invisible channels of higher alloy concentration running in specific directions. Under microscopic examination, these channels resembled the grain structure of hardwood, LMA, seemingly random but following mathematical principles of energy distribution. The second obstacle was testing. Naval specifications required plate samples to withstand uniform pressure testing. Winter's alloy performed adequately in these tests, but not exceptionally. Its advantages only appeared under asymmetric impact conditions, tests that weren't part of the standard certification process. She needed to prove her steel's value in realistic scenarios without revealing the classified program's details to routine quality inspectors. The solution came from an unexpected source: the Naval Combat Demolition Units, predecessors to modern Navy SEALs. Lieutenant Commander Draper Kaufman was developing tactics for clearing beach obstacles. When approached about testing unconventional steel samples, he agreed to incorporate them into his demolition tests. The results were quietly recorded and passed to Forrestal's office, creating the evidence trail needed to justify full implementation. February 28, 1942. Winters stood on the factory floor as the first shield alloy plates rolled off the production line. To casual observers, they looked identical to standard destroyer plate. Only spectrographic analysis would reveal the difference. Within days, the plates were being welded into hull number 445, the USS Pringle, at Federal Shipbuilding in Kearney, New Jersey. By mid-1942, 14 Fletcher-class destroyers were under construction with shield alloy plating in their upper hull sections. The modification remained classified. Shipyard workers were told only that they were working with improved formula steel, without further details. Winter's team continued refining the alloying process, gradually increasing the directional strength properties while minimizing the use of strategic materials. A production memo from August 1942 noted, "Shield implementation now requires 40% less vanadium than initial formula, while maintaining 92% of performance characteristics. This was critical as vanadium supplies tightened due to submarine attacks on shipping from South American sources. Winters's team continued finding efficiencies, eventually reducing the strategic material requirement to levels that could be sustained indefinitely. The cause and effect chain was now established. Precise alloying element distribution created microscopic structures that channeled impact energy along predetermined paths. These paths directed force away from critical failure points, allowing the hull to deform significantly without catastrophic fracturing. The technical term was anisotropic deformation resistance, but among Winters's team, it was simply called guided failure, controlling exactly how and where the steel would give way under extreme force. Production scaled rapidly through 1942 and 1943. As early Fletcher-class destroyers entered combat in the Solomon Islands campaign, initial reports were promising. USS O'Bannon survived near-miss bomb damage that would have breached conventional hulls. USS Nicholas took shrapnel hits that deformed but didn't penetrate its shield-enhanced plating. But the true test of Winters's metallurgical theories hadn't yet arrived. The concept of deliberate suicide attacks wasn't entirely unforeseen. As early as January 1943, Winters had written in a classified assessment, "When conventional air attacks prove ineffective against our fleet concentrations, the Japanese may resort to deliberate ramming tactics as an extension of their warrior ethos." Her prediction was dismissed as speculative by naval intelligence, but she continued developing steel formulations specifically to counter this threat. An entry in her laboratory journal from March 1943 shows remarkable prescience. Impact calculations for 3,000 kilograms aircraft at 250 knots suggest conventional plate will experience catastrophic failure. Modified shield alloy with enhanced lateral energy distribution channels shows 70–80% probability of maintaining hull integrity post-impact. These calculations would prove remarkably accurate in actual combat 18 months later. By mid-1943, All Fletcher-class destroyers in production featured shield alloy in vulnerable sections. The modification remained classified, but maintenance crews began noticing unusual properties when repairing battle damage. Standard welding techniques sometimes failed on shield plates due to their non-homogeneous internal structure. This led to the creation of specialized repair procedures, distributed under security classification as Welding Protocol 7A, without explanation of the underlying metallurgical differences. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. October 25th, 1944. The Battle of Leyte Gulf. Japanese air attacks intensified against Allied naval forces supporting the Philippines invasion. Conventional tactics weren't stopping the American advance. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, commanding the 1st Air Fleet in Manila, authorized the formation of the first official Kamikaze unit, the Shimpu Special Attack Corps. Their mission: deliberate suicide attacks against American vessels. The first confirmed kamikaze attack struck the heavy cruiser USS Australia on October 21, but it was merely a prelude. Over the following months, approximately 2,800 kamikaze missions would be launched against Allied vessels. Fletcher-class destroyers, positioned as radar pickets and outer screening vessels, would bear the brunt of these attacks. Their survival would depend entirely on how their steel responded in the first milliseconds of impact. The physics of a kamikaze strike generated forces far beyond normal design parameters. A fully loaded A6M Zero weighing approximately 6,000 pounds, striking at 300 knots, generated kinetic energy equivalent to roughly 1,400 pounds of TNT even before its bombs detonated. This energy had to go somewhere, either by destroying the aircraft, destroying the ship, or being absorbed through controlled deformation of the hull structure. Standard homogeneous steel plate failed catastrophically under such impacts. The energy concentrated at the point of impact, creating a shock wave that propagated outward in all directions, tearing the plate along crystalline boundaries. The result was typically a wide breach extending well beyond the impact zone, often followed by progressive structural failure as adjacent frames buckled under redistributed stresses. Shield alloy behaved differently. Its microscopic channel structures directed the initial shock wave along predetermined paths, dispersing energy through the hull structure rather than allowing it to concentrate in expanding fracture lines. The visible result was dramatic deformation. Plates pushed inward as much as 6 feet in some cases, but without the catastrophic tearing and progressive failure seen in conventional steel. USS Johnston, struck by a kamikaze off Samar on October 25, exemplified this difference. The Zero hit amidships, creating a massive dent and starting fires that took damage control teams 40 minutes to extinguish. But the hull integrity remained intact. The ship maintained combat operations and survived to fight another day. Post-action analysis revealed that the impact zone's shield alloy had deformed plastically rather than fracturing, containing damage to an area roughly twice the diameter of the aircraft. A damage control officer's report stated, "Plating bent inward approximately 4 feet at maximum depression. No penetration despite complete destruction of the aircraft. Adjacent frames distorted but maintained structural integrity. Compartmentalization preserved." This pattern repeated across the Fletcher fleet. USS Kidd, USS Hole, USS Heermann, TPA, all took direct kamikaze hits that should have been fatal, but instead resulted in survivable damage. The survival rate wasn't perfect. USS Abner Reed was lost to a kamikaze on the 1st of November 1944, when the impact ignited torpedo warheads, GS, but it far exceeded pre-war expectations for direct impact scenarios. Naval Combat Analysis Unit studies from December 1944 quantified the difference. Fletcher-class destroyers with shield alloy showed an 82% survival rate against direct kamikaze hits versus a 35% survival rate for vessels with conventional steel plate of similar thickness. The study noted, The critical difference appears to be hull integrity maintenance during the initial impact phase, which prevents progressive structural failure and allows damage control measures to be effective. As 1944 ended, Dr. Winters and her team continued refining the shield alloy formula. Late war variants incorporated additional manganese distributed along the channel boundaries, further enhancing directional strength without requiring additional strategic elements. Production efficiencies reduced the cost differential to just 12% above standard plate, while maintaining the life-saving properties that were now proving their worth in combat. January 1945, Pacific Fleet Headquarters, Pearl Harbor. A somber group gathered around a map table dotted with ship markers. Fleet Admiral Chester W. Nimitz studied the growing tally of kamikaze attacks. In the previous 3 months, the Japanese had launched over 350 suicide missions against Allied vessels. The psychological impact was profound. Sailors feared these attacks more than conventional bombing or torpedoes. There was something uniquely terrifying about an enemy willing to die to kill you. Survival statistics by ship class. Read a naval intelligence officer. Fletcher-class destroyers, 82% survival rate against direct hits. Cleveland-class cruisers, 51%. Liberty ships, 32%. The numbers drew attention. Admiral Raymond Spruance looked up sharply. "Explain the Fletcher rate," he demanded. "Those are our lightest combatants with the thinnest armor. How are they surviving better than cruisers?" A technical officer cleared his throat. "Sir, we believe it's Project Shield." Only 5 people in the room knew the details. Most had only heard rumors of some metallurgical innovation. The briefing that followed was classified above top secret. Admiral Nimitz ordered immediate expansion of the program to include additional vessel classes, particularly escort carriers and amphibious ships, the primary kamikaze targets for the upcoming Okinawa campaign. Dr. Eleanor Winters received the directive on January 12. Shield alloy critical to Pacific operations. Expand production to include Essex and Casablanca class carriers. Top priority. The technological success had created a new challenge. Could the technique that saved Fletcher destroyers be scaled to protect ships 10 times their size? Back at Bethlehem Steel's research facility, Winters stared at structural diagrams of Essex-class carriers. The Fletcher solution couldn't simply be scaled up. The physics were different. Carrier flight decks experienced forces unlike destroyer hulls. Her team would need to rethink the entire approach. "The microstructure has to change," she told her deputy, Dr. Robert Chen. "Carriers need omnidirectional strength with preferential deformation patterns. The current channels won't work." This meant re-engineering the alloy's internal structure while maintaining mass production capabilities. The clock was ticking. The Okinawa invasion, Operation Iceberg, was scheduled for April 1. The largest amphibious assault of the Pacific War would draw the heaviest kamikaze response yet. February through March 1945 became a crucible of innovation. Winters' team worked around the clock, developing and testing new alloy distributions. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Bethlehem Steel's railroad division. Railroad track steel required unique properties: resistance to continual vibration, directional wear patterns, and weather resistance. Metallurgist Samuel Kingsley had developed a technique for creating controlled crystalline boundaries in rail steel. When brought onto the Shield team, he suggested adapting this approach for ship plating. "We need steel that can dance," he explained, "not just steel that can stand firm." His metaphor captured the essential insight. Conventional armor tried to be immovable, the unstoppable force meeting the immovable object. Shield alloy took a different approach. Controlled flexibility, guided deformation, and energy dispersion. The new formula, designated Shield K after Kingsley, featured microscopic lattice structures rather than channels. These lattices created predictable failure sequences, ensuring that when steel deformed under impact, it did so along predetermined paths that preserved structural integrity. Laboratory tests showed promising results, but full-scale production presented new challenges. March 11th, 1945. Winters wrote in her journal, "Chromium supplies at critical levels. War Production Board allocating 70% to aircraft manufacturing. Without adequate chromium, Shield K will not achieve required ductility. Alternative approaches required." The materials shortage threatened the entire program, just as it was proving its worth in combat. The solution came from an unexpected direction. The Tennessee Valley Authority had been experimenting with hydroelectric smelting techniques that reduced chromium requirements by using precisely controlled cooling rates. TVA engineer Margaret Holcomb joined the Shield team, bringing expertise in thermal management during the casting process. Her innovation was elegant. Rather than relying solely on alloy composition to create lattice structures, she introduced temperature gradients during cooling. This directional solidification technique created similar microstructures while reducing chromium requirements by 42%. The revised process was implemented at Bethlehem Steel's Sparrows Point facility on March 18th. The first carrier-grade Shield K plates began rolling off the line 4 days later. A production report noted, Shield K implementation achieving 93% of theoretical performance, with 58% reduction in strategic alloy requirements compared to initial Shield formulations. This was the turning point. Shield technology could now be deployed across the fleet without straining America's strategic material reserves. Technical understanding of why Shield alloy worked had also advanced significantly. High-speed cameras captured test impacts frame by frame, showing how conventional steel failed catastrophically while Shield alloy deformed in controlled patterns. X-ray crystallography revealed the microscopic structures responsible for these different behaviors. A metallurgical study from March 1945 explained, conventional plate exhibits homogeneous crystalline structure with uniform grain boundaries. Under impact loading, fractures propagate freely along these boundaries. Shield K displays heterogeneous lattice structures that create preferential energy pathways, forcing fracture propagation along predetermined routes that minimize structural compromise. Simply put, when struck, normal steel broke along whatever path offered least resistance, often resulting in catastrophic structural failure. Shield steel broke in the ways that had been engineered into its microscopic structure, containing and dispersing energy while preserving overall integrity. By late March, 17 Essex-class carriers had Shield K armor incorporated into their flight decks and critical structural areas. The modification remained classified, listed in shipyard documents only as Specification 12F plating. Crew members weren't informed of the special protection, though some noticed unusual repair requirements when damage occurred. A maintenance officer on USS Bennington noted in his log, starboard plate sections showing unusual deformation patterns, standard straightening techniques ineffective. Recommend replacement rather than repair per Bulletin 12F7. This reflected a key limitation of Shield technology. Once its engineered microstructures were deformed, they couldn't be restored through normal field repairs. April 1st, 1945. Operation Iceberg commenced, the invasion of Okinawa. The Imperial Japanese Navy had been preparing for this moment, holding back Kamikaze aircraft specifically to counter the invasion force. U.S. Naval intelligence estimated over 2,000 aircraft had been reserved for suicide missions against the Allied fleet. The response was swift and ferocious. On April 6th alone, 355 kamikaze aircraft attacked Allied ships around Okinawa. The newly designated radar picket destroyers, positioned as early warning outposts, took the brunt of the assault. Most were Fletcher-class vessels with Shield alloy protection. USS Laffey, stationed at Radar Picket Station Hajo north of Okinawa, became the embodiment of Shield technology's success. On April 16th, the destroyer was attacked by 22 kamikaze aircraft over an 80-minute period. 7 scored direct hits. By all pre-war calculations, no destroyer could survive such an assault. The official after-action report told a different story. 1,027 hours. Kamikaze impact port side amidship. Major structural deformation observed. Hull integrity maintained. Fires controlled within 12 minutes. 1,032 hours. Second, Kamikaze impact forward gun mount. Mount disabled. Adjacent hull plating deformed but unpenetrated. 1,041 hours. Third and fourth Kamikaze impacts within 30 seconds. Starboard side aft and midships. Significant fires. Structural integrity compromised but watertight integrity maintained in all frames except 42 to 47. By 11:45 hours, USS Laffey had been hit by a total of 7 kamikaze aircraft. Fires burned across the ship. 47 crew members were dead or wounded. Yet remarkably, the vessel remained afloat and under its own power. The shield alloy hull had deformed dramatically, in some sections pushed inward more than 8 feet, but had not fractured catastrophically. Lieutenant Frank Manson, damage control officer aboard the Laffey, wrote in his action report, "Hull plating behaved unlike anything in training scenarios. Extreme deformation observed without hull rupture. Critical frames bent but not broken. This performance directly contributed to ship survival." The Laffey's survival was no isolated incident. USS Hank, USS Bryant, USS Purdy all took direct kamikaze hits that would have sunk similar vessels before shield technology. The overall survival statistics told the story. Of 21 Fletcher-class destroyers struck by kamikazes during the Okinawa campaign, 17 survived. A Bureau of Ships analysis from May 1945 stated, Fletcher-class vessels displaying unprecedented survivability. Post-impact structural integrity sufficient to maintain station and fighting capability in 81% of documented kamikaze strikes. The report continued with a technical assessment that vindicated Winter's theory. Controlled deformation patterns observed in recovered hull sections confirm microstructural energy dispersion functioning as designed. For the ship crews, the technology translated into something more fundamental: survival. Sailor testimonies frequently described the same sequence: the terrible sound of impact, the ship shuddering violently, compartments deforming inward, but crucially, no catastrophic hull breach and no progressive structural failure. This meant damage control teams had time to address fires and flooding before the ship's situation became terminal. Chief Petty Officer Raymond Davis of the USS Newcomb recalled, "We took 3 hits in under 4 minutes. The gallery deck pushed in almost to the center line. Men were thrown 20 feet by the impact. But the hull held. It bent like nothing I'd ever seen steel do, but it held. We had time to fight the fires, time to save wounded, time to save our ship." May 1945. Bethlehem Steel's Research Laboratory. Dr. Winters received detailed damage reports from vessels with shield protection. Each report included photographs, metallurgical samples from damaged sections, and structural analysis. The real-world performance data was invaluable for refining the technology. Winters wrote in her technical assessment, "Shield K performing beyond theoretical projections when subjected to combined impact and explosive loading. Microscopic lattice structures exhibiting unexpected self-reinforcing behavior under progressive deformation. This suggests potential for further optimization in next-generation formulations." The enhanced performance had a surprising explanation. The initial impact from a kamikaze aircraft created shock waves that propagated through the steel's microstructure. In conventional steel, these waves caused progressive failure as crystalline boundaries separated. In shield alloy, the engineered lattices actually compressed and locked together under initial stress, temporarily increasing resistance to subsequent deformation. This property, which Winters termed dynamic reinforcement, meant that shield steel briefly became stronger at the moment of maximum stress. The effect lasted only milliseconds, but those were the critical milliseconds that determined whether a hull would maintain integrity or fail catastrophically. June 1945. With the Okinawa campaign concluding, attention turned to Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of the Japanese home islands. Intelligence estimates suggested the Kamikaze threat would intensify dramatically, with potentially 5,000+ aircraft committed to suicide missions against the invasion fleet. Shield technology would be more important than ever. Winters and her team worked on the next evolution, designated Shield X. This formulation incorporated lessons from combat experience, particularly focusing on post-impact fire resistance. Kamikaze strikes typically resulted in intense fires, as aircraft fuel sprayed across ships' superstructures. Shield X included trace elements of copper and tungsten in specific lattice junctions, creating heat-sink properties that reduced steel's tendency to warp under thermal stress. A test report noted, Shield X samples maintain 87% of structural integrity when subjected to combined impact loading and 1,100 degrees Celsius thermal exposure, compared to 42% for Shield K and 11% for conventional plate. This improvement would prove critical in maintaining structural integrity during post-impact firefighting operations. Production of Shield X began at Bethlehem Steel's Sparrows Point facility on June 12, 1945. The first shipment was allocated to vessels designated for the Olympic phase of Operation Downfall, scheduled for November 1st. The carriers USS Midway, USS Franklin D. Roosevelt, and USS Coral Sea received priority for flight deck installation, along with critical sections of 22 amphibious vessels. By July 1945, the SHIELD program had expanded significantly. Dr. Winters now led a team of 174 metallurgists, engineers, and production specialists across 3 research facilities. The program's budget exceeded $28 million, with direct authorization from the highest levels of the Navy Department. The operational impact of the technology had been conclusively demonstrated, but it remained one of the most closely guarded technical secrets of the war. A July 15 security directive ordered all SHIELD technology documentation classified top secret. No written reference to performance characteristics outside secure facilities, verbal discussion prohibited with non-cleared personnel. This secrecy served 2 purposes: preventing Japanese intelligence from adapting kamikaze tactics to counter SHIELD protection, and preserving America's technological advantage in the anticipated post-war naval environment. August 6 and 9, 1945. Atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. On August 15, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender. Operation Downfall was cancelled. The SHIELD program continued, transitioning from wartime emergency to peacetime research. In her private journal, Winters reflected on the program's impact. Final statistics confirm 147 vessels with SHIELD protection were struck by kamikaze aircraft. 121 survived. Estimated personnel saved 7,240. Each calculation, each experiment, each production challenge, they all translated into human lives. This is the true measure of our work. The SHIELD program's full impact extended beyond the war itself. The metallurgical advances pioneered by Winters's team found applications in civilian shipbuilding, aerospace engineering, and eventually nuclear power plant design. The fundamental insight that metal's internal structure could be engineered to control how it failed under stress revolutionized materials science. September 2, 1945. As the surrender documents were signed aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, Eleanor Winters stood in her laboratory examining a damaged hull section from the USS Purdy. The destroyer had survived 3 kamikaze hits off Okinawa. The sample showed exactly the deformation pattern predicted by her models, bent nearly 90 degrees but not fractured, the microscopic lattices compressed but intact. A young technician asked, "Dr. Winters, how did you know this would work when everyone said it was impossible?" She studied the sample a moment longer before answering. "I didn't focus on making steel that couldn't be damaged. I accepted damage as inevitable and designed steel that would fail in ways we could survive. Sometimes the strongest materials aren't those that never break, they're those that break exactly as intended. Her insight transcended metallurgy. It spoke to the fundamental nature of resilience, whether in materials or people. Strength isn't about avoiding damage, it's about controlling how we respond to it. The Fletcher destroyers didn't survive because they were impervious to damage. They survived because they were engineered to deform without catastrophic failure, to bend without breaking. October 1945. The Naval Technology Assessment Board conducted its final evaluation of the SHIELD program. Their conclusion was unequivocal. Project SHIELD represents one of the most significant naval engineering achievements of the war. Conservative estimates indicate that this technology saved a minimum of 42 vessels and 7,200 personnel. The metallurgical innovations pioneered by Dr. Winters and her team will influence naval architecture for decades to come. Despite this assessment, the program remained classified until 1958. Dr. Winters received no public recognition during her lifetime for her contribution to the war effort. Her Presidential Medal of Freedom was awarded posthumously in 1972, long after many of the sailors who owed their lives to her work had raised families and lived full lives. The citation read, "For extraordinary vision and technical innovation that saved thousands of American lives." Dr. Winters' development of advanced metallurgical techniques directly enabled the survival of numerous naval vessels under conditions that would otherwise have resulted in catastrophic losses. Her work represents the highest tradition of civilian contribution to national defense. The true legacy of SHIELD technology lay not just in the lives saved during World War II, but in its long-term influence on material science. The principles pioneered by Winters' team, engineered microstructures, controlled deformation patterns, and dynamic reinforcement, became fundamental concepts in advanced material design. Modern naval vessels, commercial aircraft, nuclear containment structures, and space vehicles all incorporate variations of the principles first demonstrated in those Fletcher-class destroyers in 1944. The seemingly impossible steel mix that allowed ships to survive kamikaze impacts opened the door to an entirely new approach to material science, one focused not on preventing failure, but on controlling exactly how and where failure occurs. In her final technical paper, published shortly before her death in 1968, Winters reflected, "The paradox of resilient design lies in accepting the inevitability of damage. True strength comes not from rigidity, but from engineered flexibility. The most survivable systems are not those that never fail, but those that fail gracefully, controllably, and reparably." This principle applies equally to materials, structures, organizations, and perhaps even societies. The Fletcher-class destroyers, those workhorses of the Pacific War, carried this legacy in their very hulls. They weren't invulnerable. They were deliberately, scientifically vulnerable in ways that preserved what mattered most. As one survivor from the USS Laffey put it decades later, "That ship had no right to stay afloat after what hit us. Something about that steel was different. It saved our lives when nothing should have." November 1945, Washington, D.C. A sealed conference room in the newly completed Pentagon building, Admiral William Halsey, Jr., studied a classified report labeled SHIELD Project, Final Assessment. The statistics were compelling. Of 266 kamikaze attacks against SHIELD-protected vessels, 198 ships survived with repairable damage. The pre-war survival projection for similar impacts had been just 22%. This technology saved more American lives than the atomic bomb, Halsey remarked, yet almost nobody knows it exists. Fleet Admiral Ernest King nodded, and that's how it must remain, for now. The secrecy surrounding SHIELD technology reflected complex post-war realities. America's naval dominance depended partly on technological advantages that couldn't be shared, even with allies. The metallurgical breakthroughs achieved by Dr. Winters' team represented a quantum leap in survivability that the Navy wasn't prepared to reveal. A memo from the Office of Naval Research dated December 1945 stated, Shield technology to remain classified top secret for minimum 25 years. Research to continue under Project AEGIS. Civilian applications to be restricted to non-critical implementations that do not reveal core technological principles. Eleanor Winters received these directives with mixed emotions. The scientist in her yearned to publish, to share knowledge that could benefit humanity beyond military applications. The patriot in her understood the strategic necessity of secrecy. Her compromise was to pursue dual-track research, classified military applications under Project AEGIS, and carefully limited civilian applications that wouldn't reveal the core technology. January 1946, Bethlehem Steel's Research Division. Winters assembled her post-war team. Many of the wartime metallurgists had returned to civilian careers or academic positions. The core group that remained faced a new challenge, translating wartime emergency innovations into sustainable long-term technologies. The fundamental question has changed, Winters told her team. We're no longer asking how to help ships survive kamikaze impacts. We're asking how engineered microstructures can revolutionize material science across every industry. The first civilian application emerged in an unexpected sector: railroad safety. Samuel Kingsley, whose railroad expertise had contributed to the Shield K formulation, led a project adapting the technology for passenger train cars. Conventional train cars of the era were built with rigid structures that crumpled catastrophically during collisions. Shield-derived principles suggested a different approach. Cars designed to deform in controlled patterns that absorbed energy while maintaining passenger compartment integrity. A prototype passenger car with directional crush zones was tested at the Association of American Railroads facility in Pueblo, Colorado, in March 1946. The results were dramatic. Under identical impact conditions, conventional cars suffered 76% reduction in survivable space, while the shield-derived design maintained 83% of passenger compartment volume. The railroad industry adopted these principles under the name progressive deformation technology, never knowing its origins in wartime naval research. By 1950, 17 American railroad companies had implemented versions of this approach, reducing passenger fatalities in collisions by an estimated 64%. For Winters, this represented a partial victory. Lives saved through applied science, even if the full scope of her work remained classified. Her journal entry from April 1946 reflected this tension. Our work continues behind walls of secrecy, yet fragments escape to serve humanity. Perhaps this is enough for now. The knowledge exists. Eventually, it will find its way to those who need it. The naval applications continued to evolve rapidly. Project AEGIS, the peacetime continuation of SHIELD research, expanded beyond hull plating to include entire ship design philosophies. The fundamental insight, that resilience came from controlling failure rather than preventing it, influenced everything from compartmentalization to firefighting systems. Commander Walter Reed, damage control specialist assigned to the AEGIS team, articulated this shift. Pre-war, we designed ships hoping they wouldn't get hit. Now we design them accepting they will get hit, and engineering exactly how they'll respond when that happens. This philosophy manifested in the next generation of American warships. The Forrest Sherman-class destroyers, designed in 1947, incorporated shield-derived metallurgy throughout their structures. These weren't simply ships with special armor, they were integrated systems designed for survivable damage rather than damage prevention. The technical specifications revealed this approach. Primary hull frames engineered for progressive deformation under impact loading. Energy dispersion channels integrated into key structural members. Compartmentalization designed to contain damage within predicted failure patterns. May 1947, Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland. A remarkable test demonstrated the evolution of shield technology. Two identical-looking steel plates were mounted on concrete barriers. Both appeared to be standard half-inch naval steel. A shaped charge was detonated against each plate with identical positioning. The first plate, conventional homogeneous steel, shattered catastrophically, sending fragments flying across the test range. The second plate, incorporating Shield X technology, deformed dramatically but contained the blast energy. The plate bulged inward nearly 18 inches, but remained intact, with no through penetration. High-speed cameras revealed the difference. The conventional plate failed along random crystalline boundaries, creating unpredictable fragmentation. The shield plate deformed along engineered microchannels, absorbing energy through controlled material flow rather than brittle fracture. Dr. Robert Oppenheimer, observing the test alongside other Manhattan Project veterans, reportedly remarked, "They've accomplished with metallurgy what we failed to achieve with nuclear physics, controlled energy distribution at the molecular level." The term metallurgy, parallel to nuclear research, was apt. Both fields involved manipulating matter's fundamental properties to control energy flows. The difference was that shield technology focused on absorbing and redirecting energy rather than releasing it. This distinction would prove critical in the emerging atomic age. June 1948. American concerns about Soviet nuclear capabilities were growing. Intelligence suggested the Soviets might test their first atomic device within 2 years. Military planners began considering how to protect critical infrastructure against potential nuclear attacks. Project Aegis shifted focus toward this new threat. Could the principles that allowed ships to survive kamikaze impacts be adapted to help structures survive nuclear blast effects? Early calculations were promising. Shield-derived materials showed enhanced resistance to both overpressure waves and thermal effects compared to conventional construction materials. Dr. Winters led a classified briefing for the Joint Chiefs of Staff in August 1948. Her presentation was direct. "We cannot make buildings immune to nuclear effects, but we can engineer structures that fail in predictable, survivable ways under blast loading." The difference between catastrophic collapse and reparable damage often comes down to controlling exactly how materials respond in the first milliseconds of energy transfer. This concept resonated with military planners who understood that complete protection from nuclear weapons was impossible. The realistic goal was to design critical infrastructure that could maintain essential functions even after absorbing significant damage. The same philosophy that had saved Fletcher-class destroyers during kamikaze attacks. A directive from the newly formed Atomic Energy Commission authorized expanded research, Project Aegis, to prioritize application of shield-derived technologies to critical infrastructure protection. Focus areas to include command bunkers, communications, facilities, and energy distribution nodes. By early 1949, prototype bunker designs incorporating shield principles were being tested at remote sites in Nevada. These structures didn't look particularly impressive. Conventional concrete exteriors gave no hint of the engineered materials inside. But blast testing revealed dramatic differences in survivability. A test report from April 1949 noted, "Conventional bunker exhibited catastrophic structural failure at 18 pounds per square inches overpressure. Shield-modified structure maintained 72% of internal volume integrity at 35 pounds per square inches. Critical command functions could continue despite significant external damage." The timing was fortuitous. On the 29th of August 1949, the Soviet Union detonated its first atomic bomb, ending America's nuclear monopoly. The Cold War had entered a new phase, and infrastructure survivability suddenly became a national priority. For Eleanor Winters, the escalating arms race created profound ethical questions. Her work, begun to protect sailors from kamikaze attacks, was now being applied to nuclear war planning. Her journal entries from this period reveal her inner conflict. The 4th of September 1949. "The technology that saved lives in one war may help prevent another. If potential adversaries believe their first strike cannot eliminate our command structure, perhaps they won't strike at all. Deterrence through survivability rather than retaliation. Is this a morally defensible position? I no longer know." Despite these doubts, Winters continued her research, believing that defensive technologies were ultimately more ethical than offensive ones. Her team expanded to include structural engineers, blast effect specialists, and even psychologists studying human response to structural damage. By 1950, shield technology had evolved far beyond its original naval applications. The Korean War created new urgency for practical implementation. Shield-derived materials were incorporated into field command posts, ammunition storage facilities, and critical bridges in the Korean theater. A classified after-action report from November 1950 documented one such application. Command bunker at Chipyong-ni sustained direct hit from 152mm artillery. Conventional analysis predicted complete structural failure. Shield-reinforced roof section deformed 1-2 meters but maintained integrity. 23 personnel survived with minor injuries. Command functions continued without interruption. Similar reports emerged throughout the conflict. Shield-derived technologies weren't flashy or obvious. They were invisible improvements that saved lives when conventional materials would have failed. This pattern of quiet success characterized the program's entire history. While military applications expanded, Dr. Winters continued pushing for civilian technology transfer whenever possible. Her team developed a modified version of shield materials for automotive safety, focusing on controlled deformation patterns in vehicle frames. The safety cell concept, a rigid passenger compartment surrounded by energy-absorbing crush zones, emerged directly from shield research, though its origins remained classified. By 1954, several American automobile manufacturers had implemented variations of this approach, marketed simply as safety engineering, without reference to the underlying technology. A statistical analysis from the National Safety Council estimated that these designs prevented approximately 1,200 fatalities annually by 1955. Eleanor Winters kept a copy of this report in her desk drawer, tangible evidence that her work continued saving lives long after the war ended. The military applications continued advancing in parallel. The Forrestal-class aircraft carriers, America's first supercarriers designed in the early 1952s, incorporated shield-derived technology throughout their structures. These vessels weren't simply armored in the conventional sense. They were engineered at the microstructural level to respond to damage in controlled, survivable ways. A Navy evaluation from 1954 stated, Forrestal structural testing demonstrates 340% improvement in blast resistance compared to Essex-class designs. Critical systems maintain functionality under damage conditions that would have rendered previous carrier classes combat ineffective. By this time, Dr. Winters' health had begun declining. Years of exposure to industrial chemicals and experimental metallurgical processes had taken their toll. Though only 52, she suffered from respiratory problems and early-onset Parkinson's disease. Her formal role in the AEGIS program diminished, though she remained a technical consultant. In March 1955, Winters received a confidential letter from Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz, recently retired as Chief of Naval Operations. It read, in part, "Though your contribution must remain classified for now, please know that thousands of sailors returned home to their families because of your work. No medal or public recognition can match the value of those lives saved and futures preserved. History may not record your name alongside the great scientists of our age, but those who know the truth will never forget." Winters kept this letter in the same drawer as the automobile safety statistics. Together, they represented the dual legacy of her work: military lives saved during war and civilian lives protected during peace. Neither achievement could be publicly acknowledged, yet both had changed the course of countless individual lives. By 1956, the scope of shield-derived technologies had expanded beyond materials science to influence entire design philosophies across multiple industries. The core insight, that true resilience came from controlling failure rather than preventing it, had become a fundamental principle in fields ranging from nuclear containment to aerospace engineering. A technical journal from this period, cleared for limited circulation within classified environments, summarized this evolution. Rather than attempting to create impervious structures, we now design systems that respond to damage in predictable, manageable ways. This approach acknowledges the inevitability of failure under extreme conditions while ensuring such failures occur along engineered pathways that preserve critical functions. In October 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, beginning the space race. The SHIELD program's relevance expanded once again. Space vehicles faced extreme environmental challenges, micrometeorite impacts, radiation effects, and dramatic thermal cycling. SHIELD-derived materials offered potential solutions to these challenges. NASA, established in 1958, recruited several engineers from the AEGIS team. Though still unable to access the program's classified core technologies, these specialists brought with them the fundamental design philosophy, controlled deformation, engineered failure paths, and microscopic energy management. These principles influenced early spacecraft design, particularly the Apollo program. The multi-layered approach to micrometeorite protection, thermal management systems, and impact-resistant structures all incorporated elements derived from SHIELD research, though filtered through multiple layers of classification. A NASA engineer who had previously worked on the AEGIS program noted in a private memo, "The principles developed for ship survivability against kamikaze attacks have direct application to spacecraft protection against micrometeorite impacts. Both scenarios involve high-energy, localized impacts against structures that cannot afford catastrophic failure." By 1960, Dr. Winter's health had deteriorated significantly. Though her mind remained sharp, her physical capabilities were increasingly limited. She transitioned to a consulting role, reviewing technical reports and providing guidance to younger engineers who knew her only as a brilliant metallurgist, not as the woman who had saved thousands of lives through scientific innovation. In June 1961, Winters received a visit from Admiral Arleigh Burke, recently retired as Chief of Naval Operations. The meeting was not recorded in any official capacity, and what transpired remained private. However, Winter's journal entry that evening provided a glimpse. "Burke brought the letter today from a sailor named Thomas Carlson, who served aboard the Laffey during those terrible days off Okinawa. He wanted me to know that he had celebrated his daughter's college graduation last week. I wasn't supposed to live through that day," he wrote. "Something about that ship kept it together when nothing should have. Whatever it was, it gave me 16 more years of life. It let me see my daughter grow up. No scientific achievement could mean more than this." In October 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. Strategic planners on both sides calculated survivability scenarios based partly on infrastructure hardening technologies. Unknown to the public, SHIELD-derived materials protected key American command and control facilities, including portions of the newly constructed hardened Pentagon and various strategic air command bunkers. A declassified analysis from this period noted, Soviet first strike scenarios assumed 87% degradation of NCA National Command Authority capabilities. Actual vulnerability assessment based on SHIELD implementations indicated maximum 43% degradation, sufficient to maintain continuous command functions and assured second strike capability. This survivability gap, unknown to Soviet planners, contributed to America's strategic confidence during the crisis. The technology that had begun as protection against kamikaze attacks had evolved into a critical component of nuclear deterrence. Eleanor Winters passed away on the 7th of March 1968, exactly 24 years after the USS Fletcher survived its first kamikaze attack in the Philippine Sea. Her death certificate listed the cause as pulmonary fibrosis, likely related to years of exposure to industrial chemicals and metallurgical processes. Her funeral was small and private. No military honors were rendered. No scientific organizations sent representatives. The classified nature of her work meant that her greatest achievements remained unknown to all but a handful of individuals. Yet in bases and shipyards across America, flags flew at half-staff by quiet order of the Chief of Naval Operations. a silent tribute to a woman whose work had saved thousands of lives. 3 months after her death, the USS Forrestal survived a catastrophic fire while operating off Vietnam. A mishandled rocket ignited a fuel fire that threatened to consume the carrier. Conventional wisdom suggested the vessel should have been lost. Instead, the ship's shield-derived structural elements contained the fire long enough for damage control teams to extinguish it. The official investigation noted, primary deck structures exhibited extraordinary thermal resistance, maintaining integrity despite exposure to temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. This performance directly contributed to vessel survivability. What the report didn't mention was that the engineering team that designed those structures had worked directly with Eleanor Winters 15 years earlier. Her influence continued saving lives long after she was gone. In 1972, President Richard Nixon posthumously awarded Winters the Presidential Medal of Freedom. The citation acknowledged her extraordinary contributions to national defense without specific details. The ceremony was closed to the press. The medal itself was presented to her nephew, her only surviving relative. The true scope of Winters' achievement remained classified until 1995, when portions of the SHIELD program were finally declassified. By then, the technological principles she pioneered had been independently discovered and implemented across numerous industries. What had once been revolutionary had become standard engineering practice. A metallurgical journal summarizing the declassified information noted, Dr. Winters' work on microstructural energy management represented a paradigm shift in materials science that anticipated developments in composite materials, engineered failure modes, and directional strength optimization by nearly 3 decades. Had this work been publicly available in the 1,940 seconds, countless additional lives might have been saved through earlier implementation across civilian sectors. Modern naval architects still study the Fletcher-class destroyers as examples of remarkable survivability. The ships that shouldn't have survived, that had no right to remain afloat after absorbing impacts far beyond their design parameters, continue to influence maritime engineering nearly 8 decades later. Perhaps the most fitting tribute came from a letter written by a former sailor aboard the USS Laffey, sent to a naval history museum in 2005. I don't know what they put in that steel, but it saved my life and the lives of my shipmates. We took 7 kamikaze hits that should have sunk us 10 times over. The ship bent and burned, but it didn't break. They don't make ships like that anymore, or maybe they do, and they just don't tell us ordinary folks how they do it. Either way, I've lived 60 extra years because someone smart figured out how to make steel that could take a punch. That someone smart was Eleanor Winters, the metallurgist who understood that true strength isn't about being unbreakable, but about controlling exactly how, when, and where breaking occurs. Her legacy lives on in design philosophies that prioritize survivable failure over impossible perfection, in engineering approaches that acknowledge damage as inevitable and focus on managing its consequences, and in countless lives, extended because materials behaved exactly as she intended them to when subjected to forces beyond their normal limits. The impossible steel mix that saved the Fletcher destroyers wasn't really impossible at all. It simply required someone willing to challenge conventional thinking, someone who understood that resilience comes not from resisting damage, but from responding to it in controlled, survivable ways. In that insight lies a lesson that extends far beyond metallurgy. True strength isn't about never failing, it's about failing in ways that preserve what matters most. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.